The heat had long ceased to be just heat. It was a weight, pressing down on the skin, soaking into the bones, turning every step into something pulled from the depths of will alone. She walked barefoot and burned, her soles cracked and bleeding, but still moving. There was no town behind her and no clear promise ahead, just land, dry and endless. Dust clung to her arms, her neck, the hollow of her throat. It mixed with sweat, then dried into powder again. Her dress, once red, was now the color of earth. Her lips split when she tried to swallow, but she didn't stop. The body, even broken, remembers the rhythm of survival. The land was cruel, but it wasn't watching. The sky above was too bright to look at, and the ground too hot to rest on. A dead bird lay by the side of the road, twisted. She stepped around it without looking. Her vision was beginning to flicker. Somewhere behind the hills, hooves stirred up a low roll of sound. Distant at first, then closer, then silence again. She didn't turn her head. She had forgotten what it meant to be seen. When the horse appeared beside her, she flinched. Barely. Just a muscle under her eye. The man on it looked down. He didn't say a word. Didn't ask. Didn't offer help. He just reached for his saddlebag, pulled out a canteen, leaned down, and set it in her hand. His fingers didn't touch hers. Then he rode on. She stood there, hands shaking, the canteen heavy with mercy. It wasn't salvation. It wasn't kindness in words, but it was water. Cold. Real. Enough. Her knees gave out slowly, without drama. The dust rose around her as she sank. She didn't drink right away. She held the canteen like something sacred. The tin felt hot on the outside, but the inside promised life. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of hooves faded again. He hadn't looked back. She didn't know if she would get up, but now she could. The sun dipped lower, painting the hills in orange dust. She finally drank, slow and careful. Each swallow burned a little, waking muscles that had gone quiet. She closed her eyes. The breeze shifted. For the first time in days, it didn't feel like knives. She didn't know who he was. Maybe no one. Maybe just another rider on a road that swallowed people whole. But he had seen her. Not stared, not judged, just seen. Night would come soon. She would need to move again. But now she could wait until the heat faded, until the stars came out and turned the road silver. Somewhere an owl called. Somewhere coyotes waited for weakness. But she had water. She had air in her lungs. Her feet still hurt, her back still ached, and the dust still clung. But the silence no longer felt like death. In the morning she would walk again, and maybe, this time, not alone. She adjusted the canteen in her lap as if it might vanish. Something about the way he hadn't spoken made it feel realer. Words had always cost her more than they were worth. But this gesture was simple, clean. She thought about the man's horse, the way it moved, strong but tired, just like him, just like her. Maybe they had all come too far to turn back. She didn't hope for a miracle, didn't dream of a cabin or bread or kindness. Just more water, a little shade, maybe a place to sit without shaking. The road waited. Dust would rise again tomorrow, but tonight she had something in her hands that hadn't been taken, and that was enough to hold on to. Somewhere behind her, footprints baked into the earth. Ahead, only horizon. But her fingers tightened slightly around the tin, and her eyes, though dry, did not close. The desert for once felt a little less cruel. Morning crept in slow, pale and dry. There was no dew here, no softness, just the steady crawl of light across cracked land and brittle grass. She hadn't slept. Her body had rested, but her mind never let go. The canteen lay beside her, half empty, and still the most precious thing she owned. She stood, slow and stiff, dust falling from her shoulders like memory. Her feet screamed at the pressure, torn and angry, but she walked anyway. There were no birds, only the wind scratching the dry weeds. The road was the same, quiet, sun-bleached, endless. Every few minutes she stopped, not to rest, but to listen. Part of her expected the sound of hooves again, that slow, rhythmic echo she now carried somewhere under her ribs. But there was nothing, just her breath and the crunch of dirt under bare feet. Around midday she saw fence posts, old, leaning, half swallowed by brush. Signs of something. A ranch, maybe, or what was left of one. She followed the posts like they meant something, like they pointed toward a reason to keep walking. By late afternoon, a house rose from the land. Not big, not new, but still standing. A roof with patches, a porch that sagged. She didn't smile. Hope was too sharp to hold, but her steps quickened. When she reached the fence, she stopped. Her legs trembled. Her hand gripped the post. She didn't call out, didn't move. She just looked. He was there. Not on a horse this time, but standing by the side of the house, hammer in hand, mending something she couldn't see. He didn't react at first. Maybe he hadn't noticed her. Maybe he had, and chose to finish his work before turning. When he did look, it wasn't surprise. It wasn't anything loud. He just nodded once. A gesture like dusk. Soft, slow, expected. She didn't step through the gate. Didn't dare. He went inside. She stayed where she was, hands gripping the top rail. The fence was splintered, old, like it hadn't been touched in years. The silence stretched, long enough to make her wonder if she'd imagined him, long enough to feel the sun again. Then the door opened. He came back with a tin plate in one hand and a folded cloth in the other, set them both on the porch step, then turned and walked away, disappearing behind the side of the house again like nothing had changed. She didn't move for a long time, but her feet did, on their own, slowly, as if pulled forward by the scent. Bread, maybe, beans, something hot anyway. Crossing the yard felt like trespassing. Her legs didn't trust the grass. It had been too long since anything soft. She reached the steps, sat without thinking, and stared at the plate. Her fingers were trembling again. Not from fear now, but from something else. From being seen. The cloth was a shirt, she realized. Old but clean. Too big for her, but warm. She wrapped it around her shoulders before she ate. The food was plain. Perfect. Every bite told her she was still alive. Somewhere behind the house, a hammer rang once, then stopped. She didn't look for him, didn't speak. When she finished, she folded the cloth neatly, set it beside the empty plate, and walked back to the fence. She didn't know why. Maybe to show him she wasn't staying. Maybe to see if he'd ask her to. But he never came back out. Not while she stood there. The wind picked up. The dust began to move again. She looked at the door one last time. Then she turned slowly and kept walking, with something warm on her back. The sun was low again by the time she found the river. Not much of one, more a muddy curve in the land, with slow water hiding beneath reeds and bugs. But it was enough. She knelt, cupped the brown water in her palms, drank what she dared. The coat he'd given her, his shirt, still hung around her shoulders, soaked now with sweat and grit. She held it tighter, though, like it was permission to keep going. The land dipped here, softening into a pocket of quiet. Trees lined one edge, gnarled and leaning. She crawled beneath them, made a bed of leaves and dirt, and pulled her knees to her chest. Her feet throbbed. Her lips cracked again. But the coat stayed. She didn't cry. There was nothing left in her to push tears through. Only the rhythm of breath and blood and the faint sound of crickets starting somewhere far off. She slept, not deeply, not safely, but without dreaming. At dawn, she rose. She didn't know what day it was or where she'd find the next step, but something moved her forward, habit maybe, or the weight of silence growing lighter. When she walked again, the horizon bent slightly to the left, a trail, faint, worn down by wagons long gone. She followed it. The morning burned away quickly. Her back itched from sun and dirt. She drank the last of her canteen and didn't think of where more might come from. By noon, a figure appeared in the road ahead. She froze. Not fear, just the body's memory of danger. The figure didn't move, just stood, waiting. She stepped closer. Slow. It was him. He wasn't on a horse this time. Just a man on a dusty road, arms at his sides, coat open, eyes calm. He didn't speak, didn't step forward, but he didn't turn away either. She stopped a few paces from him. Waited. The sun pushed between them, sharp and silent. A hawk circled above, low and lazy. He reached into his coat, pulled out something, jerky wrapped in paper, and held it out. She didn't move at first, then carefully took it. Their hands didn't touch. He turned around and walked off the road toward a grove of mesquite trees. She stood there, the paper warm in her hand, her stomach pulled tight. She hadn't realized how long it had been since solid food. She followed. The trees offered shade, the ground still hot but softer. He sat down against a trunk, pulled his hat low, said nothing. She sat a few feet away, unwrapped the food, ate in silence. Birds flitted through the branches. Wind tapped the leaves. The sun climbed and settled. After a time, he took off his coat and folded it under his head. His breath slowed. Sleep, maybe. She watched him, not out of fear, just out of not knowing what else to do. Later she dozed too. When she woke, it was near dusk again. The light had turned gold. He was gone. But beside her sat a small tin cup and a cloth sack of dried apples, and the coat was draped across her lap. She didn't smile, but she didn't leave it behind. She rose, folding the coat with care, and slung the sack over her shoulder. The road waited again, quiet and long, but her steps were steadier, slower, like she'd begun to believe in the distance. The wind came from the west now, and it didn't sting. The next days passed without words, just the road, just the sky, sometimes a bird, sometimes the wind. She walked, and sometimes he was nearby, not close enough to speak, not far enough to forget. He stayed behind her mostly, let her lead even when she didn't know where they were going. He made camp first, left firewood stacked neat, always 2 cups, one full, one waiting. She ate, she drank. She sat by the fire while he slept by the trees. They moved like orbiting things, circling quiet. On the 4th morning, she woke before the light came. Something in her chest felt sharp, not painful, just new, like breath, but deeper. She turned and saw him kneeling at the creek's edge, rinsing his face, shaking water through his hair. She didn't speak. He didn't turn. Later they walked again, and as they passed a fork in the road, he paused, looked at her, looked west, then took that turn. She followed. The sun was hotter now, the land flatter, their shadows longer. The sound of flies hummed through dry grass. They passed a broken fence, a dead tree, an old sign split by time, half buried in weeds. She couldn't read it, didn't try. That night there was no fire, just stars. The coat he'd given her had started to smell like him, dust and ash and something warm. She didn't take it off. Sleep came harder now, not because of fear, because she'd started to wonder what he wanted, why he stayed. The days blurred. Once a storm passed near, a wall of dust and wind, turning noon into dusk. They found shelter beneath a crumbling outcrop, crouched in separate corners, eyes closed against the roar. When it passed, she found her hand covered in grit, the coat around her knees. He didn't look at her when they stepped back onto the road. Another time, they came across a ranch that had been burned to the ground. Black timbers, a rusted pump, an old swing, swaying in the wind with no child to claim it. He stopped walking there, just stood, staring. She didn't ask. She kept moving. Later, she looked back and saw him kneel beside the ashes. They camped near a dry arroyo that night. Coyotes cried far off. She didn't flinch anymore. He boiled something in a dented pot. Beans, maybe. Set the bowl near her and walked away into the dark. She ate alone. When he returned, he sat closer than usual. Not near, but not distant. The stars stretched wider that night, and for the first time she found herself listening for his breath, counting it, memorizing its weight. She didn't mean to sleep near him, but her body moved, quietly, slowly, not touching, just near. In the morning, she woke to find his coat draped over both of them, and his saddlebag open, as if he meant to leave something behind. She didn't wake him. She didn't move the coat. Just laid there, eyes open to the sky, and breathed in the air between them. For now, the road could wait. When they reached the next town, it was barely more than a few scattered buildings and a crooked church leaning into the wind. A general store, a stable, 2 homes with curtains that never moved. No people in the street, just the smell of dust and tobacco and something tired. He tied his horse without speaking. She stood beside him, coat wrapped close, eyes down. No one looked their way. Inside the store, he bought flour, salt, coffee, handed over coins without counting them. She didn't follow him in, stayed on the porch, watched a dog limp down the road like it owned the silence. When he came back out, he handed her a pair of boots. Small, worn, but stitched solid. She didn't try them on, just held them, as if to understand them first, then nodded once. They stayed the night in an abandoned barn just outside town. He laid his coat down for her to sleep on, took the dirt himself. In the dark, she stared at the rafters above, her feet now wrapped in boots that almost fit. The leather rubbed at her heels, but it was a kind pain, one that meant forward. He sat by the open door, watching nothing. The stars behind him framed his outline in silver. A sound broke the stillness, not from outside, from her. A breath caught, sharp in her throat. He didn't move. She sat up, crossed the dirt between them, stopped just beside where he sat. She didn't sit, didn't speak, just stood there, letting the air between them say everything her mouth couldn't. Minutes passed. Then he reached behind him, pulled the coat and held it out again. Not for warmth this time, for invitation. She took it and sat. They didn't touch, not yet. But the space between them had changed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of breath, of nearness, of the things people only said by staying. They sat like that for a long time. When the sky paled and the wind shifted, he stood first, nodded once, slow and sure, then saddled the horse, packed their things, left one boot print in the barn's dust. She followed, the coat still around her shoulders, her feet still sore in the boots he'd found. On the road again, they moved like rhythm. Step, breath, silence. Step, breath, silence. She watched the way he walked, measured, steady, like the ground always knew him. She found herself walking the same, matching, echoing. They passed a boy by the fence of a cattle yard. He stared at her with wide eyes, then turned to the man with something like fear. She waited for him to answer it, to soften it, but he just touched his hat, polite, and walked on. She didn't understand what people saw when they looked at him. Something strong, something sharp. But he'd never been sharp with her, only quiet, only steady. They camped near a dry patch of scrub, no fire, just moonlight. He set down their food, then moved to the edge of the rise to watch the sky. She ate without hurry, then joined him. She didn't speak, but she didn't sit far. When the wind picked up, he didn't offer the coat. It was already hers. The air changed as they rode into canyon country. Walls of red stone rose on either side, towering like forgotten temples. Shadows fell early here, and the light stayed low, even at noon. Echoes lived between the cliffs, birdsong, hoofbeats, the creak of leather. They spoke still in silence. Days passed without measure. Sometimes they shared food. Sometimes she watched him work, gathering branches, mending tack, wiping dust from his horse's flank with a gentleness she hadn't expected from rough hands. It was like watching weather settle. Once, while collecting water from a shaded stream, she caught her reflection. Her face thinner, eyes darker, but steadier. The coat hung loose on her frame. Her boots were scuffed. She didn't look like the woman who had walked barefoot into the sun. She looked like someone who had chosen to keep walking. That evening, he handed her something small, a comb, wood worn at the teeth but smooth. She stared at it in her palm, then nodded. That was all. She combed her hair beneath the stars, piece by piece, as if reclaiming it. He didn't watch. Or maybe he did, but only when she wasn't looking. They reached a trading post 2 days later. Just a shack and a hitching rail, but a man there sold coffee strong enough to scrape the tongue and jerky hard enough to test teeth. She sat outside while he bartered. A woman stepped from behind the post, older, gray-haired, wearing a pistol low on her hip. She eyed the girl, narrowed her gaze, asked no questions, but she left a blanket at her feet before walking off. They rode out before sunset. The wind followed them, tugging at the hem of her coat. That night, they camped on a ridge above a dry basin, no trees, just rock and wind and open sky. He made no fire, just sat with his back to the stars. She sat beside him. Minutes passed. Then she spoke. The words came quiet, like dust shaken loose. Her name. Just her name. He didn't react, didn't ask for more, but she saw the shift in the line of his shoulders, in the way his hands stopped moving. It wasn't much, but it was the first word between them. The next morning he gave her a piece of paper, blank save for a charcoal stub tucked in the fold. She looked at it like a puzzle, then at him. He just nodded toward the ridge. She sat there for hours, not drawing, just holding the charcoal, feeling the weight of her own name again. When she returned, the paper was still blank, but her hands weren't shaking anymore. They rode along the rim that day, the sun hard on their backs. Hawks circled above. Below in the basin, bones glinted in the dust, old cattle maybe, or something else long forgotten. He stopped once to fix the saddle strap. She crouched beside him, offering nothing but presence. He didn't ask for more, but when he stood again, his hand brushed her shoulder. Light, barely there. She didn't flinch. She didn't move away. They followed the canyon westward, where the stone turned pale and the heat fell heavier. The trail grew narrow, worn by hooves long vanished. No signs, no markers. Just trust in the land beneath them. She had stopped counting the days. Time passed through her like wind, felt but never held. Her body was leaner now, her stride longer. There was strength in her silence, a shape returning to something whole. That night they found a spring, a small pool beneath a bluff, ringed with scrub and birdsong. The water was clear and cold, and she let it run over her arms, her neck, her face. She didn't cry, but the sound she made was close. He stood a little away, watching, always watching, not to control, not to own, just to be near if needed. She took off the coat to dry it on the rocks, sat cross-legged in her undershift, shoulders brown with sun, skin marked by the road. She didn't hide, not anymore. He cooked something simple. She ate all of it. Later, as the sun fell, he handed her a piece of dried hide. Inside it, a stone pendant. Nothing fancy, just river rock, smooth and dark, with a hole worn through the middle by time. She ran her finger through the hole, wore it like a name. When she lay down that night, she rolled onto her side to face him. His eyes were open, watching stars, or her. She didn't ask, but she didn't close her eyes either. They rose before light, moving without words. The road climbed now, winding between rock and sage. Coyotes barked in the distance, and she no longer startled. Her steps were sure, her shoulders square. By midday the sky turned gray. Not storm gray, just a thick hush. He looked up once, sniffed the wind, and said nothing. But she saw the set of his jaw change. They kept walking. In the afternoon they came upon a fire-scarred tree, tall and split down the middle. She touched its charred bark. It crumbled under her fingers like memory. He waited. She let go. That evening, when they stopped, she took the comb from her satchel, sat with her back to a log and began untangling knots. He brought a bowl of water and placed it beside her. Not a word. She looked up at him, just once, then returned to her hair. When she finished, she handed him the comb. Not to give, just to share. He took it, held it, then passed it back. Something wordless passed between them. The fire cracked low. Night pressed close. She moved nearer to him, not by inches, but by instinct. The coat was around both their shoulders now. His hand rested beside hers in the dirt. She didn't touch him, but she didn't move away when his fingers found hers. Not holding, just touching, like the first drop of rain after a long, long drought. By the time they reached the old rail tracks, the mountains had softened behind them. The land stretched wide and golden, broken only by dry creek beds and the skeletons of windmills that hadn't turned in years. The girl walked beside his horse now, not because she was tired, but because the rhythm of their steps had become a kind of language. He looked ahead mostly. She looked at the world. They passed a station once, just bones of it, charred beams, a single wall standing, stubborn and cracked. Inside, a burned stove and a child's boot half buried in ash. He paused there. She watched him stand in the doorway, still and unreadable. Then he turned as if to say something, but didn't. They moved on. That night they camped near the edge of an old orchard, dead trees still reaching. The moonlight made their branches look like arms pleading with the stars. He built a fire. She brought kindling. Their hands touched once. Brief, accidental. But this time neither of them pulled away. They ate in quiet. And after, as the flames sank into coals, she stood, walked to his bedroll, and sat down. Not on it. Beside it. She didn't ask. He didn't question. He simply shifted his weight, gave her space, and when she lay back, he lay beside her, not touching, just near, like a shadow or a prayer. The wind rose that night, low and constant. It slipped through the orchard like breath through teeth. She slept with her hand resting between them, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to let silence breathe. In the morning there was frost on the ground. He gave her his gloves. Didn't ask for them back. They crossed the valley in long silence. Birds wheeled high above. A coyote trailed them for half a day, never getting close, just watching. That afternoon they reached a riverbed, mostly dry but with enough water pooled to drink. She knelt to fill the canteen. He held the horse. When she turned, he was watching her again, but softer now, like someone who had waited a long time for something he never said aloud. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. That evening they didn't make camp, just stopped under a wide sky, stars already breaking through. She unrolled the blanket. He laid beside her, and when she placed her head on his shoulder, he breathed in once, deep, and let it go slow. No words passed between them, none needed. He reached for her hand. This time he held it, not like an answer, like a promise. Later, as sleep took them, coyotes howled in the distance. She didn't hear them. She was already dreaming of hands that didn't hurt, of eyes that saw her, not as broken, but as becoming. By the ninth sunrise, the road had begun to bend south, cutting through low hills and dry brush. The heat came earlier now. The shade was rare, and they shared it when they found it. They spoke more often, not with words, but with glances, with hands passed close, with the way she leaned slightly toward him when he slowed to drink. One afternoon they passed a grave, a simple cross, no name, no flowers, just a ring of stones someone had taken time to place. She stopped, looked at it for a long while. He didn't urge her on. When she moved again, there was something different in her eyes, a kind of mercy, a kind of decision. That night she unpacked the stone pendant, tied it around her wrist with a strip of hide and sat beside him before the fire. He offered the last of the bread. She broke it in half, handed it back. They ate in silence, shoulders close. Later she reached for his hand again, but this time she didn't let go. The stars that night were dim behind thin clouds, but the warmth between them held. He laid back, arms folded behind his head. She lay beside him, her head on his arm this time, not asking, just being. She slept light, but she slept near. In the morning, he was already brewing coffee when she stirred. He handed her a cup without looking. She sipped slow. It was bitter. She didn't mind. They moved west again, following nothing in particular. There was no map, just instinct, just sun and dirt in a direction that felt right. At a rise, he stopped and pointed to the distance. A small shack near a windmill, barely standing. A plume of smoke curled from the side, gentle and gray. They approached slow. A woman stood out front, bent with age, stirring something in a tin pot. She looked up, didn't flinch, just nodded once and went back to stirring. He said a name. The old woman nodded again. Went inside. She watched it all without speaking. Later, the woman brought out food, hot cornbread, beans, thick coffee. Said nothing, just set it down and left them alone. She ate more than usual. He didn't comment. They slept that night beneath the awning. No fire, just blankets and breath. And in the stillness, she turned to him and placed her hand on his chest. Not for comfort, for knowing. He laid his hand over hers. No kiss, no rush. Just the steady thrum of something that had taken root. In the morning, he carved something into the wood by the shack. A word. Her name. She didn't stop him. They left the shack before the sun climbed high. The old woman waved once from the doorway. No words, just that quiet farewell only wanderers understood. The road stretched ahead like a breath held too long. They rode now, both on the horse, her in front, his arms light around her waist. Not holding, just steadying. She didn't look back. He didn't either. By midday, they found themselves on a ridge overlooking a valley so wide it looked like the world folded open. Fields yellowed with sun, a stream cutting silver through it. A house, small and alone, sat near the bend. She didn't ask whose it was. He didn't offer. They made camp under the open sky, their last fire burning low. That night she spoke more than she ever had. Not stories, not confessions, just pieces. A memory here, a name there, the color of her mother's dress, the smell of cornbread. He listened, and when she fell quiet, he said one thing. Stay. Just that. No plea, no promise. Just a place in the silence, offered like bread. She didn't answer. Not right away, but she didn't move when the fire died. Didn't reach for her boots. Just laid back and watched the stars like they were letters from the past, finally making sense. At dawn, he was up early, tending to the horse. She joined him without speaking. Together, they rode the last mile to the house by the stream. The fence was broken in places. The porch leaned. But there was smoke in the chimney, and the door stood open. He dismounted first, helped her down like something sacred. She stepped onto the porch, turned once to look at him. He didn't smile, but his eyes held the answer. Inside, the house smelled of wood and memory. Dust hung in the light, slow and soft. She walked the rooms, touched the table, the wall, the windowsill worn smooth by years of hands. In the back room, a bed stood made. She sat on it. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. She didn't ask what came next. She only said, "This'll do." Later, she swept the porch while he fixed the hinge on the gate. The wind moved through the grass like an old hymn. And in that stillness, in that nothing of a place with no name, they became something new. Not lovers, not strangers, just two people who kept walking and finally stopped, together. Because sometimes the road doesn't end with thunder. Sometimes it ends with a home and a quiet place to say nothing at all.